After much hype, the new RoboCop game Rogue City is finally out for the Xbox, PC and PS5. Developed by Teon, who had handled the surprisingly good Terminator Resistance from a few years ago, which I had reviewed on my channel and thoroughly enjoyed. It was clearly made by the fans for the fans, and Rogue City aims to do the same. The early reviews and overall feedback has been generally positive, with some fans of the popular franchise absolutely loving the game, and others in the gaming press in particular feel it's dated with its graphics and gameplay, following similar complaints they made at the time towards Terminator Resistance.
I'm very disappointed. I'm sure it's only a glitch.
RoboCop is no stranger to video games back in the 80s and into the 90s. Robo appeared pretty much on every computer or games console. I have explored the history of the games in a previous video, with a lengthy retrospective on all the titles released. The last RoboCop game hit the consoles back in 2003, which was produced by Titus, who had never had a good reputation, especially for their licensed games, Superman 64 being a good example. With Titus's game being panned by the critics, RoboCop went into retirement, and for fans they would have to wait over 20 years for a new game. Teon wanted to follow on the success of their Terminator game with RoboCop, and like that game stays very faithful to the movies to deliver fans essentially a new RoboCop film in the form of a video game. Rogue City takes place before the events of RoboCop 3, as Anne Lewis is alive and well, as the police continues the battle against the drug nuke. So this is a new take on RoboCop 3, or say RoboCop 2.5 I suppose, but there are visual elements taken from the third film, such as the police station and advertisements for Delta City. There are mentions of a Japanese company looking to purchase OCP, and the rebel Bertha.
Get that.
Why?
It looks expensive.
The game's story opens with RoboCop rescuing hostages from the Channel 9 studios that has been taken over by the Torchheads and their leader Soot. After a quick battle, RoboCop suffers hallucinations of his past life as Alex Murphy. OCP assigns Max Becker, who is head of security concepts, as RoboCop's overseer, installing a monitoring chip on his head to evaluate his performance. OCP are still set on their goal to build Delta City and replace the police with robots, so they have full control with the flick of a switch. There is a new threat in Old Detroit called the New Guy. RoboCop is ordered to locate Soot, who they believe is working with him. RoboCop and Lewis track Soot down to an abandoned slaughterhouse where a Torchhead concert is taking place. As RoboCop apprehends Soot, he comes face to face with the New Guy. My expectations were quite high for Rogue City, as I really enjoyed Terminator Resistance, having Peter Weller return to provide his voice, though sadly Nancy Allen doesn't come back to voice Lewis. But having Peter back is a big fan pleaser, as he hasn't returned to the franchise in such a big way since RoboCop 2 in 1990. Though it's been many years since he did the proper Robo voice, he still sounds great. RoboCop throughout acts very much like himself before he uncovers his human side, so he dishes out the lore in his very machine-like way, which with continuity doesn't make a lot of sense as he became human at the end of Robo 1. But I think it's fine for the context of the game. So with the gameplay, it carries over what they did with their previous Terminator game. You can interact with people and ask them multiple questions to gain information to solve a crime, and depending if you support or disagree with what they say, it has an outcome on the ending, though only affecting characters connected to the main narrative. So you have this RPG element to it, which makes it more interesting than your standard FPS game, which most often has you shoot some bad guys, have a cutscene, then it repeats that formula. Rogue City, you naturally get more invested into the story, though I do think the story for Terminator Resistance is a bit more polished compared to Rogue City. It's not to say Rogue City is not interesting. The only frustrating element is the conversations with the characters involving side missions for the most part, which aren't of much interest and generally are a bit bland. A number of those side missions results going somewhere to collect something or speak to someone else, then going back to the first person you spoke with to complete it. A bit laborious. The RoboCop films had quite a bit of humour thanks to its clever satire, and the game developers tried to bring that over to the game but are less successful, as writing good satire is not easy. They do incorporate some humorous side missions for Robo, such as going around and getting a get well card signed, kids asking RoboCop to do the robot dance, issuing parking violations, and a side mission with Pickles looking for a VHS tape and movie trivia comes into play, with nods to Paul Verhoeven initially turning down the RoboCop script and complaints about sequels being rubbish. For the game's combat, you can make use of RoboCop's targeting system, making it easy to shoot the bad guys, or find an explosive canister to shoot, or even bounce bullets off a wall like in RoboCop 2. You can upgrade Robo's classic gun, the Auto 9, which starts out very weak, but you can find OCP chips scattered around where you can mod PCB boards to increase its power. But for the first couple of hours into the game, you often end up using a submachine gun, which is far more effective, but you burn through ammo quickly, so getting your Auto 9 modded is in your best interests. RoboCop can gain extra abilities, which are granted by earning XP points to improve his armour, health, and getting some extra defense moves to dash forward to ram the bad guys. The graphics throughout range from very good to a bit subpar. There is definitely issues with character designs. They are often poorly animated and don't act realistically to the dialogue that has been pre-recorded by the voice talent. Outside of the main characters from the film, the rest don't have much detail, and you have repeated NPCs walking around the streets. During the cutscenes, I noticed a few glitchy moments with characters disappearing. There is several audio issues, with the voiceover going out of sync, the audio not being balanced, where you have the voices sounding too quiet or too loud, so it's best to have the subtitles on so you know what they are saying. Obviously these things can be fixed with a patch, but it doesn't give you the strongest impression when the opening cutscenes exhibit sync issues with the audio. Despite those nagging technical issues, the levels are really well detailed. They have managed to take iconic locations from RoboCop to give you full access to them, with the police station, OCP, and the factory where Murphy died, and your final encounter with Clarence Bodica. They are nicely rendered throughout, with superb lighting. They've done a great job to replicate the world of RoboCop. Early tests of the game, critics complained it was too easy. Robo is a walking tank and can soak up bullets, which is kind of true. I played it on the normal difficulty setting and didn't die until I encountered Ed 209 for the first time, as escaping from his constant onslaught of bullets and rockets made it tough when RoboCop only does a brisk jog to move quickly. A bit like watching an old man attempt to run but ends up being the same speed of walking. And your Auto 9 is pretty useless at that point, so throwing gas canisters was the best option, but it took me a few goes. I only really struggled with the boss encounters, as the game gives you plenty of options to refill your health. Naturally, the closer you get to the end of the game, those energy packs become less readily available, and a lot of the enemies have far more powerful weapons at their disposal, so it becomes more challenging. When it comes to the music, they make great efforts to use the musical score of the first film, by using the classic RoboCop theme and a theme for the villains. I had thought at first they just licensed the music and put it in the game, but no, they have recreated those themes, and they sound very faithful. Which they did with Terminator Resistance, and the game ended up having a cracking soundtrack. Sadly, the Robo theme only kicks in a couple of times in the game and doesn't always pop up when it comes to shredding your enemies with bullets. Seeing the bad guys get blown apart with the RoboCop theme in the background did put a big smile on my face. It's just like in the film. Being a fan of RoboCop since the early 90s, this game certainly flicks those nostalgia switches for me. It's the first time you get to play RoboCop as a proper police officer. It's not just having walk from left to right shooting up and down like back in the day. RoboCop 3 on the Amiga really tried to do something different, so that game is the closest that comes to Rogue City in terms of ambition. Rogue City tries to tap into RoboCop's psyche, with the memories of his past haunting him, but after a while it becomes a bit intrusive on the gameplay, as it stops the flow to have another flashback or say nightmarish-like sequence. The developers Teyon have done extremely well for some might say a smaller studio. Many big studios have taken on licenses to produce games that may look the part but don't offer much in terms of gameplay. EA handling Star Wars has been a bit up and down over the years. Teyon are clearly fans of the material, cramming in loads of little references to the films, and with the gameplay maintaining what makes RoboCop so appealing. I don't think this game is for everyone, however. Someone looking for a fast action-packed game may find it a bit too slow and boring to go through, the heavy conversations with people to get information, and tackling side missions and just want to cut to the chase instead. But if you loved Terminator Resistance, then you will certainly enjoy this. It's not a perfect game by any means. There are a few nagging issues on a technical level that can be resolved over time with updates, but it's nice to have a solid single-player game that is not designed from the ground up to be focused on multiplayer and pushing in-game transactions, but just providing an experience that is focused on telling you a story that centres around RoboCop battling crime and dealing with his past, with some enjoyable action thrown into the mix. It's certainly not original with its gameplay, but it's the best that's been offered to experience the fun of playing as the iconic character. It's interesting that the first film was the only successful one, whereas the sequels didn't perform well. RoboCop 3 everyone universally hates, the TV show was trashed by the fans for it appealing to kids, and the later TV show Prime Directives, the less said the better, and the remake was an insult to the original 1987 masterpiece. So there is more bad RoboCop stuff out there than good, but thankfully Rogue City restores some quality back into the franchise. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button and click the bell to be notified of my latest retrospectives and reviews. Big thanks to my patrons for supporting the channel. If you want to get involved and gain early access to my content and exclusive videos, then follow the link below.